Okay, good morning. So my name is Matthias Egger, and I am the president of the Research Council of the Swiss National Science Foundation. I'm also an epidemiologist and public health scientist based at the University of Bern, but also in Bristol and at the University of Cape Town. I wanted to start off with a remark on the map that you showed, Professor Fasoli. When we look at our data at the SNSF, we see that young people with the career funding instruments, they mainly go to the US and to the UK. Once they're back and develop their career, they mainly collaborate with European countries. So France, mainly Germany as well, Italy, the UK, etc. So it sort of confirms what you showed. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my case in terms of international collaboration. And then Delphine, also from the SNSF, will talk about what is on offer from the Swiss National Science Foundation in terms of international funding opportunities. So let me take you back to the 80s. I'm an old man. And my international collaboration really started as a medical student when I went in my elective to Ghana. And I even did my first study during that elective. It was a randomized controlled trial in children with Buruli ulcer. Buruli ulcer is a terrible disease which is not well understood still today and cannot be well treated. And we did this randomized controlled trial testing cotrimoxazole. As you see from the sample size and the p-values on that table, 6 and 6, I still had a bit to learn in terms of how to do randomized controlled studies that are actually, providing results that are useful. But it was an attempt and the recruitment was lower than expected. So what I did next was I went to the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine to study epidemiology. This stay during my elective really sort of did something to me and made me realize what I want to do is public health and epidemiology science. I didn't have any support from the Swiss National Science Foundation. I think there was none available. But at that time, the British Council still funded Swiss people to go to the UK to study. And they funded my tuition fees in London. The rest I paid by my savings after having worked for a few years as a resident in different hospitals. So that again was an incredibly important time for me, which really changed my life in many ways. And I met a lot of people that I'm still in touch with today during that year in 1986, 1987. For example, this book, which came out in its 3rd edition a few months ago, was done with George Davis Smith, who was one of my classmates in '86. So one lesson is, when you start early to build networks, they may last for a very long time and be beneficial to you and the others in that network. The beginning of the 90s saw the advent of the HIV pandemic, which was a huge challenge, a very, very sad time in the beginning of the 90s, the end of the 80s, when no treatments were available and people really died and died and died. Millions. And that was again something which me as an epidemiologist really got at me, and I felt I need to go into this field. I need to make a contribution to the research that was so needed at that time. So what I did was I went back to the UK. My friend George had a project funded by the European Task Force on AIDS at that time at UCL. So this is University College London, and I was employed there on an EU project. Sadly, this would not be possible anymore, but at that time it still was. And the project was about HIV/AIDS prevention in Central America. And I want to show you one study which is quite unique. It's a study of condom use promotion in moteles in Nicaragua. So I don't know whether you're familiar with the concept of moteles. Moteles are places where people go for a few hours to have sex. So because there's no privacy at home, there are crowded conditions at home, and people go to these places to have sex, and of course they should protect themselves from sexually transmitted infections and HIV. So what we did was we tested different ways of getting people to use condoms. We made condoms available in the room. We put leaflets like that one here on the walls. So these are the doors to the rooms in one of these moteles. And we had a very reliable outcome measure. After each couple, because these rooms didn't have flush toilets, after each couple, we went into the room and checked whether a condom had been used. Okay? We collected 3,000 used condoms. It's a bit early perhaps for this, but that's what we did. And obviously this study really showed what works, and I don't have time to go into it, but it was quite an important study in HIV/AIDS prevention, because it really, had a very hard endpoint. So in 1993, the Swiss National Science Foundation actually realized it needs to promote young academics. And this was the first sort of cohort, if you like, of career funding at the SNSF. And I was lucky enough to get one of the biomedicine fellowships, the Prof fellowship. And that really, again, was an incredibly important point in my career, because it gave me several years of freedom to basically do what I want. And at the same time, the Swiss HIV cohort study had been set up and was accumulating data that needed to be analyzed. And I have to say that the Federal Office of Public Health was really visionary at that time in establishing this data resource and establish a large HIV cohort study. I think Switzerland was probably one of the first, if not the first, country establishing such a cohort. There were many others that followed, but the Swiss were really, thanks to who would have thought, the Federal Office of Public Health, had really done that very early on in a visionary way. So I, of course, joined that study, and we did a lot of work and really established the Swiss HIV cohort study as an internationally well-known and respected resource with a lot of important contributions to the literature, which immediately, actually were translated to clinical practice. Now, in 1996, these new drugs came along. Several reverse transcriptase inhibitors and the protease inhibitors, and these two classes made up, at that time, the highly active antiretroviral combination therapy. And since then, as you see on the left, other drugs have come along, like the integrase inhibitors, etc. And what happened was really HIV infection became a disease which was much less lethal. So mortality really dropped with the introduction of these triple therapy schemes. And one consequence of this was that we realized we need larger studies. We don't have that many outcomes anymore, luckily, but in order to understand what was going on, we basically need international collaboration. And we set up the ART cohort collaboration. At the beginning, 13 cohort studies from Europe and North America were established because insufficient data are available from single cohort studies to allow estimation of the prognosis of HIV-infected treatment-naive patients who start this combination therapy. At that time, everyone wanted to participate. So the issue of, I think you alluded to that not everyone wants to necessarily, that wasn't an issue in the field of HIV/AIDS. People were really committed to clarify these questions, to contribute to data that are needed in order to find answers. And a few years later, luckily too late, but still, these treatments also became available in sub-Saharan Africa. Also, thanks to the PEPFAR initiative, which I will mention in a minute, but the worry was that in Africa, where health systems are weak, these treatments will not be used appropriately, there will be a lot of resistance emerging, and there will be anarchy, chaos, etc. And that's when I got an invitation to the NIH to discuss the possibility of establishing such cohort collaborations that we had done with the European and North American cohorts in the African region, but also in Latin America, globally. And that was the birth of the international epidemiology databases to evaluate AIDS. Together with colleagues from Cape Town, I am the PI of the Southern African region. Overall, more than 500 clinics participate, 44 countries, more than 2 million people living with HIV. And we do a lot of different types of research. We do very clinical research, very public health research, but also translational and health services research. We look at resistance, we do lab studies, etc. It's really a platform which is incredibly valuable to look at the whole host of questions. And of course, PEPFAR is the United States President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, which was put in place by George W. Bush and which invested more than $100 billion in treating patients in African countries. Probably has saved about 20 million lives. And next month, or in December, on the 1st of December, World AIDS Day, George W. Bush and Laura Bush will be going to Washington and will be honored. And they have received many, acknowledgements and prizes for that PEPFAR scheme. And I think PEPFAR was important for the idea collaboration in the sense that the NIH felt if the US invests so much, we need to have a scientific branch in order to understand what we're doing. So the idea collaboration, a bit like the Swiss HIV collaboration as well, has really been a catalyst for careers. I mean, I made my career basically on the back of that study. It was a springboard. I got to the collaborative and then to being a PI in IDEA, and this has been funded by the NIH now for 17 years, constantly renewed. And also we got 27 supplement funding grants from the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases since 2012, 4.5 million. The budget per year is about 4 million, that's the core budget. We also recently got an R01 grant, they're difficult to get, from the NIH on dolutegravir resistance, which is one of these new antiviral drugs. We got 13 research grants on, from other funders, like including the SNSF, and so forth. So it was really a springboard for many careers, this idea collaboration and also the Swiss HIV cohort. So when I look back, I think there are a few lessons that I would like to share with you. One is, go when you're young, try to get independent quickly, do what you want to do, take risks, do what you feel passionate about, and from a funder's perspective, make sure that these people can do that, and Delphine will present what the SNSF is doing to make that possible. But also, I think the Swiss HIV cohort study as an example of a digital, of a data infrastructure, of a study platform infrastructure, which led to Switzerland being an important player at the NIH in that context, shows that such data resources are really important to get Switzerland on top in one area, but you need to be quick. You need to be doing this when the time is right. You need to be the right person at the right place at the right time, and the funding agencies, who are often, including the SNSF, quite conservative and slow, they should rethink how they can react quicker to such developments. And of course, COVID is another example, and I'm not sure whether what had happened with HIV has been repeated with COVID. So with that, I'm thanking everyone, and there are so many people to thank along this journey, and thank you for listening.